Okay, Chinese and Japanese imperialism. Shadows over the Pacific, as they call it. So here we go. All right. Know about the Opium Wars. I condense them into one. There's more than one. I'm not going to split hairs with it, but here's what happens. The British, as we learned in chapter 17, and all of Europe, Portugal, want to trade with China. China is well more advanced than these other societies, and China wants nothing to do with Europe for the most part. They tell them, we've heard of all your goods, but you have nothing for us. The British are trying to find their way into it, and they find it by opium that they get via, not Afghanistan, but India. And they take it there and they offer it for sale. And they get tons of people hooked on it because it's a very lucrative deal. They're dealing drugs, okay? So, to make it a little shorter is, the Emperor of China appeals to Queen Victoria and says, you got to stop this. You can't keep doing this in our country. You wouldn't like it. They outlaw opium, but the British keep doing it. So, again, the British are drug dealers in a foreign country. And the Chinese have outlawed it. But they keep doing it. And then the Chinese round up and arrest people, maybe even some people killed, however the story goes. And the British cry foul. We've been attacked. British subjects and soldiers have been attacked. And they go in and they seize parts of China in the Opium War. Okay? And here's a boat called the Chinese boat. It's called a junk, which I think is kind of funny. Right? It's where we get our word a piece of junk from, because the British ships are blowing them apart, because the British ships are more advanced at that time compared to China. So it's a piece of junk, probably being driven by a thug. Get it from the last chapter? And what ends the Opium Wars is the Treaty of Nanjing. As you can see, this is setting a terrible precedent, much like the Crimean War. China, who didn't start the war but loses it, has to pay 21 million ounces of silver. Hong Kong is ceded to Britain until 1996, I think. I always say it's 1999, like Prince. Party 2000 to the overreach out of time, but I think it's 96, 95 or 96. They hold on to it. And the opium trade is continued. Okay, and so the Chinese are being punished for this. And again, this goes right in with the Treaty of Versailles that, we're going to punish the losers of the wars no matter who started it. Chuck Norris has a website. It's called the Internet. And so what happens here is America does actually stick its head in. So as you saw with Africa, Africa was a complete takeover. Africans had no say, no right. The European countries just took over them and didn't even ask questions. Well, China is just far too old and complex of a country. It is, to allow the area to allow that to happen. So what they do is it's spheres of influence. It's not a complete takeover of the dynasty. And all these European countries go in and they say, well, this is ours, that's yours. It's just like a scramble for China. But the Chinese are still kind of involved because they're not about to just go away. And the Americans, through a guy named John Hay, actually introduced a thing called the open door policy. It's a gentleman's agreement. Hey, no one's going to dominate in China. Just share, pillaging and tearing up this country. And it's what it is, open door policy, so it's at the bottom there. It's a proposal to stop the frantic pace of of imperialism in China and to avoid a war over China. Okay? So, how the Chinese react to this is one of the first is the Boxer Rebellion. These dogs get tired of people saying, "Oh, your face is so cute," and rubbing, and they bite people, and no. Boxers are a group of people that get together and they say, hey, all of China's problems are blamed on foreigners, especially missionaries. You're trying to change and wipe out Chinese culture. If we got rid of the foreigners, everything would be fine. Yeah, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Huh? How many times have we heard this in societies all around the world? The Germans, the Nazis, the Americans. We argue this today, even though we're a nation of foreigners. You hear people, go back to your own country. Well, this is my country. I was born here. It's nonsense. And Chinese have a little bit of clout here. They do. There are foreigners in their country that are completely trying to take over it. So they try to take over the Chinese, their own country back. But again, the Europeans don't like this. They send in 12 countries, 20,000 troops. And let's get the cat out of the bag. What do the Europeans want from China? I ask this now. Is China an industrialized country? Is it today? No, it is not, no matter what anyone tells you. 60 to 70% of people in China still work in agriculture, maybe even higher. It is not industrialized. Yeah, they might have huge cities and all of this, but it's not industrialized. And so what do we say? What do they need first? Back to the link. Everyone's thinking. Enlightenment ideas, right? Some kind of revolution, industrialization, imperialization, then war. What the Europeans want from China, they're saying, hey, you're a big player in this game, man. Enlighten your people. Give them a revolution. Have them stop living on these plots of lands. Get them to have private property. Get them to have these farms. Get them to be entrepreneurial so they will be next industrializing. And China refuses to do it. And one way, as we talked about in chapter 17, that they refuse to is the civil service exam that they still have running their country. This antiquated, old way of doing it. And they tell them, you must have a constitutional monarchy. You must give your people some rights so they feel they're part of this whole industry. And the Chinese refuse. And so they are fighting and fighting against this. And basically, the problem with China is, unlike, say, the shogun in Japan that we're going to see, or even the Weimar Republic in Germany, how it's going to fall apart for the most part overnight, or anything of that nature. Even the American Revolution happens very fast. China just slowly collapses, almost like the Ottoman Empire. It doesn't just happen overnight. And then what happens with China is, most people say, if you ask yourself, hey, where's China in the early 1900s, the First World War, the Second World War? Nobody knows. Nobody. I mean, it's just like, oh, it's kind of, and it's correct. It's kind of in limbo. It's extremely important in the 1870s, 80s, 90s. People want China. They're trying to get it to reform. By 1911, there's these huge revolutions. They're working on it. They're fighting. It's a bloody civil war. And then World War I hits. Everyone forgets about it. And then after World War I, they're so focused on the peace and on the Great Depression that follows, everyone forgets about China again. Wait, what's better than World War I? You got it, a second war. World War II comes around, and everyone forgets about China again, except the Japanese. And then finally, after they come out of that, China will become a communist country in 1949 when the communists win the civil war over tons of different people, but mainly pro-democracy people. Democracy doesn't stand a chance in China, as you can see. Hopefully, you're reading right here as I'm talking. All these things, China does not want to. They want to have Confucian ideas from back in the old days. And that's another reason communism does so well in China when Mao Zedong comes around. This guy on the left is Chiang Kai-shek. He's backed by the Americans. And in 1946, after World War II, he offers the Chinese money, wealth, everything you could imagine. You could be just like an American, have Coca-Cola. And Mao Zedong says, or you could have the communist idea where you give to your ancestors, give to your neighbors, work a small piece of land. Don't try to be flamboyant. Don't try to be famous and all this. Which one of those lines up with ancient Chinese ideals? American democracy or, Stalinistic communism? Now, we well know that what Mao offers these people is terrible. Most of it's death and destruction, but people are blinded by that. They have no connection to American ideas of freedom and speaking out in this culture. So that's why I would argue communism wins out. And there's the two people right there. In 1949, Mao does win. Chuck Norris doesn't care if the glass is half empty or half full. He's still going to roundhouse kick you to the face. Oh, I don't know. Do we even introduce Beazle? I think we did, but here's the home with Beazle when he was alive. He's not alive anymore. But there's his daily schedule. All right, lastly and finally, Japan. What's Japan's problem? Whoa, don't scream out anything. I've had crazy stuff yelled out before. Its problem is it is an island nation with no natural resources. It's the size of California with half the population of the United States. Ooh, start over. An island nation, no natural resources. It's a volcanic rock. It's the size of California with half the population of the United States. Try that one on for size. Okay? Who ends their isolation? Well, on July 8th. Thank you all for the birthday wishes. That's not actually true. I didn't get any, but it's okay. Matthew Perry. The Americans send a guy over under a president named Millard Fillmore, and we say, hey, this is what we want from you. We want diplomacy. We want a place for trading. Because remember, after the chapter in Japan, if you recall, when the missionaries had gone there in the 16 and 1700s and they had been expelled, Japan did not let anyone into their country. Anyone. If you landed and you weren't meant to be there, they executed you. If you were shipwrecked, they had nothing to do. They were completely shut off from the outside. But the Americans go with what's called the Black Guns of August, or the gunboat diplomacy, and they fire these big guns and they terrify the Japanese. And the Japanese have the best answer ever. This is how they deal with imperialism. Matthew Perry says, what's your answer? Do you want to be with us, or do we have to force it on you? And they say, can you give us some time to think about it? Could you go back and ask your president for more time? And that's why I like history, because today we'd be like, sure, let me email him real quick. But back then, it's a 2-month, 3-month voyage, one way back. Here's what they said. Well, go back and tell him this. And so they've got to wait and all this. Well, why they do that, Japan already starts its transformation before the Americans even get back. And they say, 14 years after Perry's arrival, as you can see, the entire Japanese feudal system collapses. Their old way of life, the shoguns, the large landowners, dictators are all gone, and Japan is going to start acting like a modern country. They're going to use the French Revolution. Again, you don't need to know all these semantics too much about it, but know this, as you can see at the bottom there, right? It's a democratic in form, but it's despotic in practice and nature. It's basically just what the Japanese do is they put up a mask, people. Does everybody understand? Let's get it out. I know I'm talking fast. I do apologize, but I want to get done here before the 15 minutes is up. How these two nations react to imperialism are directly the opposite. The Chinese, who could have fought off the Westerners, you would think, quite easily, simply just put up their block and say, no, we don't want it. They allow this, they allow that. No, stop, you're punishing us. And they fall apart, basically, and are conquered, for the most part. The Japanese, on the other hand, say, oh, what's better than being imperialized? I'll tell you, being an imperialistic nation. We will join the club with you, and then we will imperialize. But we have a facade that looks like we have allowed our people freedom of thought and freedom of thinking and enterprise, but they haven't. But it makes the Europeans very happy, and they think, oh, Japan has done it. They've done it. But they haven't. So lastly, what happens is what's known as the Russo-Japanese War, 1904. This is one of those Rick James. Cocaine is a hell of a drug. Russia is concerned about. Japan is concerned about Russia's encroachment on Korea. So Japan attacks Russia and then takes Korea. And Korea's like, hey, what the hell just happened here? How did we get involved in this? Okay, and the war is over very quickly. The Japanese beat the living daylights out of the Russians. Take a look at a map sometime of how big Japan is compared to Russia. It would blow your mind. But it's a real quick war fought mainly on the water and the Navy and all this. The Japanese surprise attack the Russians. Anyone? Right. And 40 years later, or 38 years later, what do they do to the Americans? A surprise attack, except not on the land, but via air through planes. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, people. And Russia has to give in, and Korea is annexed by Japan until in 1910, and will stay under their control until the end of World War II. Know this for sure, Japan is now seen as a legitimate world power. The white race is no longer thought to be invincible. And the last thing is, if I can tie this up, remember, what have the Americans and people been saying? Who has the right to control your country? You do. Individual rights. Japanese should rule who? Japan. Koreans should rule Korea. This is my kid crying if you can hear him screaming here. Filipinos should rule Philippines. But we have, the Spanish-American War, we have invaded the Philippines, and we don't give them their rights. And who also could swoop down and knock us out of the Philippines? You got it, the Japanese. But Teddy Roosevelt goes over and brokers a deal and says, hey, Japan, how about this? You let us stay in the Philippines, and you don't knock us out, and we'll let you stay in Korea and won't say anything until 1950. Right? I mean, it's one of those, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of things. And this is Japanese propaganda here. You see, I'm sorry, people. Russian propaganda from the 1900 war. Look at this big white Christian Russian soldier that's punching out this Japanese that looks like a chimpanzee, if you can't tell. Extremely racist. And the exact opposite is actually what happened. Okay? So hopefully you enjoyed my kids screaming in the background. Potluck supper Sunday, prayer and mediation to follow. Have a good week, people.